Welcome back to the Conscious Entrepreneur Podcast. My guest today is John Sampogna, who built a 100-person creative agency from the ground up while he was in his 20s, sold it to an advertising holding company, and continues to run it today. As co-founder and CEO of Wondersauce, John has worked with all sorts of brands you know and recognize like Nike, L'Oreal, Grubhub, and more. But in this conversation today, we get beyond those logos and case studies into something much more interesting. John shares what it takes to hold a long-term vision for the business through multiple phases of growth, pressure, and uncertainty. We get into his idea of the mental balance sheet, which is sort of how to account for the emotional cost of entrepreneurship. We also talk about scaling without burning out, what makes a leader truly approachable, and why every bottleneck in the business is a signal for operational change. This episode's fantastic. It fits right into the themes and the conversations that we have at the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit. This is coming up May 28th and 29th in Boulder, Colorado. And it is a space for founders who want to build a really clear vision, 10x their business, grow with intention, and scale without sacrificing themselves. There's more on the website, consciousentrepreneur.us. I'd invite you to please go check it out. But for now, let's jump into this conversation with John Sampogna. Hey, John, great to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
It's going to be a fun conversation. You've had quite a ride with Wondersauce, a really interesting story. And I would love just to get a quick overview of you and the company and the journey that you've been on so far.
Yeah. So again, thanks for having me. We started the business back in 2011, so about 14 years ago. Myself and my business partner had left different agencies in New York, and we had this idea to start a business that was inspired by the way we grew up in terms of kind of our adolescence being mapping back to the internet and maturing alongside of it. Everything from the early days of AOL into like file sharing and Napster, into pre and post Facebook at college, everything in our 20s around like the mobile app economy being established, and obviously everything going on today. So we wanted to build an agency that was as dynamic as the growth of the internet and our only constant being change. So we started the business back then. We grew really fast from 2 people to over 100 in a few short years. And it's been a wild ride, honestly, ever since. We kind of focus on everything from campaign development and media buying, so helping clients achieve different areas of growth from a revenue standpoint. And then we also do a lot of digital transformation work, everything from building mobile applications, websites, and digital products.
And so the company was founded in 2011. I'd imagine that you were pretty young in 2011. And then you sold to Project in 2016. Is that right?
That's right.
And what does that look like? What did it mean for you to let go of the baby, have someone else acquire it? I know that's a big thing. A lot of entrepreneurs look forward to that. And at the same time, I'm perfectly aware that a lot of pros and cons for that kind of transaction. So walk us through kind of how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, it was like I said, the first 5 years of the business was wild. It was like a pinch me moment every week or two. People just started showing up at the office, and they just kept on kind of growing and growing and growing and taking on amazing clients, where by year 3, I think we started getting people interested in acquiring us, and we would take coffees, take meetings. And at one point we were like, what are we doing here? Are we doing this? Are we not doing this? And I'll say the biggest challenge for us was so much of our day to day as founders became like the operational burden side of things that isn't fun. Managing your accounts receivable, collections, balancing the line of credit with the bank, all the things that are really not fun. But when you have a month over month cost of $1 million a month, you got to find the money. We had the money. It was just a matter of all of the like logistical scale back office stuff that is really not fun to do. So we wanted to find a partner that could help us with that, but also we wanted to have the controls of the agency still. And Project really values entrepreneurship, and we love that like 90% of the founders were still with their agencies that they had acquired, which was an amazing sign for us and honestly unheard of. And yeah, that was back in 2016. And here we are 8 years later, and I'm still driving the boat.
That's really cool because there's so many horror stories about acquisitions taking place. The company, the acquirer sort of botches it somehow, but for one reason or another, it doesn't never really fully realizes its potential, and everyone kind of walks away being like, "Yeah, okay, great," but like, you don't necessarily feel that good about it. So it's cool that that you've been able to do that and have continuation for your vision over the last 8 years. So that says something good about them. It's funny. I was literally at a breakfast this morning in Denver talking to some folks about that, and one of the people at the table was thinking about. He's basically in the process of hiring a banker to sell his business, and we were
Sure.
talking about, oh, is it going to be a strategic? Is it going to be a roll up? Is it going to be a PE firm? And these are considerations that a lot of entrepreneurs don't necessarily think of ahead of time. So, how intentional were you about this? About saying, was this just like, hey, we want to make some money and go do it, and then at what point did you start to say, no, we want to make sure that we're going to be able to continue with the business and to continue to execute our vision? Like, how did you think about that?
Yeah. And honestly, I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. At least it's like 3 or 4 times a year. I have this conversation. And I think like there's multi layers of decisions. The first layer to me is like, how healthy is the business? So, like, fortunately for us, we were in a position of power because our business was healthy. So, at that point, when the business is healthy, the money is going to be right. It's just a matter of which partner. And obviously, like for me, money wasn't everything; it was fit. And if your business is not healthy, then it's a different conversation. It's about is this about just like unloading HR costs and talent and tucking it into another business so you can kind of walk away? Is it a lifeline where they could kind of help you get through a really difficult time and ultimately still sustain the business? But I think like that's the first question I would ask myself is like the general health of the business. The next one down, I think, is really around what you want personally out of it. If And I think it's really important to be transparent with the potential buyers throughout the process. If you're done with whatever industry you're in and you want out, you should be very transparent about that. And I would hope that you've built in operational scale. So when you step away, there's a management team ready to take over the day to day, and you can prove that and tell that story. So when you say, "Look, I've done this for X amount of years, it's no longer for me, but I've got an amazing management team." So I'm going to be part of these negotiations as the sole, principal holder here or one of the majority holders, but I'm no longer going to be part of the business. I think if that's your goal, be upfront about it. And if your goal is to stay with the company, then there's a whole slew of questions you need to ask around, where they see you, where they see the business. Is the business going to be a standalone entity where the brand is going to be a platform, or is it going to be tucked into something bigger? What does that mean for you? Who are you reporting into? So those are all questions that we really asked. I think looking back, we were pretty young, but we had all this stuff pretty well defined in our minds.
And so you were the founder running the company for 5 years, and then now it's been 8 years since the acquisition. So how did your role then change? Like how is it different to be, the startup agency founder running it and, getting it to a certain scale quickly versus, okay, I now need to operate within the bounds of this other entity, even understanding that they sounds like they're pretty hands off and that they've given you a lot of liberty, but I'd imagine there's still some differences. What are those?
Yeah, I mean, they want us to operate in a way that is good for the broader network, but they trust us to run our business, which is really important. But yeah, things changed a lot. I mean, I mentioned this earlier, but the first 5 years were wild. Like we really didn't get um, there wasn't many negative moments, and then uh, one of the reasons I wanted to stay on too was I wanted to mature as a CEO. I wanted to go through some things. One of those things was the earnout, going through an earnout process. What is that like? The stress of hitting numbers. And you make some good decisions and you make some bad decisions. I thought like, then midway through, like COVID happened, which was a whole other thing. Like navigating a business from showing up in an office 8 hours a day to being completely remote, and what is that looking like? And then coming out of COVID, what does hybrid look like? Where we're in the office sometimes, we're on the road sometimes, we're working from home sometimes, and the new idea of like company culture. It's no longer about like just having cool ping pong tables and dogs in the office and beer kegs. It's about trust and transparency. It's about flexibility. It's about like defining a role for in-person collaboration. So it's a lot of like interesting challenges. And then coming out now, it's like the role of AI and what is that going to impact the industry, specifically a services industry. And so I've always found like interesting little bits of like stimulation to kind of latch onto. And for me, it's kept the business really interesting.
So yeah, so you got a lot of what you wanted out of this. And again, like I want to reinforce this for everyone who's listening, that like, a lot of people think of the like an acquisition like that as being the end goal, right? And it's not necessarily the end. Sometimes it's just a stepping stone into furthering your career, developing new skills, getting more resources, and having a potentially a bigger vision then to execute against, right?
100%. And I hear a lot like the idea of having exits is really like glamorous within business.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, like I'm very proud of that moment. It was a really, really big moment that I will never forget. But I don't go around like bragging about exits. It's like also like, what have you done after it? Did you like, was there respect in the deal? I think there's a lot that goes down around acquisitions that is like not necessarily the full story. So like you can have an exit, but it could have been a disaster. So like I never understood the glorification of that. So for me, it was just a moment, just like winning a huge account or achieving a level of scale. It was not the end goal, and I don't think it should be.
Now you've got a pretty interesting mental model when it comes to being an entrepreneur and a CEO. You described it as having a mental balance sheet, right? As
Yeah.
kind of a way to get through the days and weeks and months. What do you mean by that? What's on a mental balance sheet? How do we think about that?
So it was something that we kind of established very early on. I don't have like an MBA or a formal business background. I didn't study economics or anything like that or accounting. So when you start operating a business, there is the quote cost of doing business, which in the case of an advertising agency, it's your people, your tools, travel, entertainment, office expenses, etc. And that, in simple terms, it means I need to make X amount of dollars to keep the lights on every single month, and hopefully there's a little bit of profit. So the first step for us was, as an entrepreneur, getting used to just the fact that you owe that every single month, and you need to kind of make the money to pay the bills.
Right.
And then there's always these things that happen on a week to week basis that it's a series of firsts where, they're not that big deals. They're not a big deal when you zoom out, but at the time it's like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to sleep. This is horrible. Maybe it's like you get fired by a client. A great employee walks out. Someone that always pays net 30 just tells you that they're paying now net 90 or something. There's something maybe financial or legal that happens. All these things that start to build. It's very easy to spiral out of control and to lose sleep. And
Yeah.
I remember early on being really stressed out all the time, and just telling myself, it's just this week, it's just this month. Things are crazy. Oh man. But you realize that it's not this week, it's not this month. This is just the cost of doing business. So whenever something like that would happen, I would document it in my head. And the second time it happens, it wasn't like a one-off incident. This is just a new normal that you need to think about, figure out an operational procedure to handle it, and work it into your balance sheet every single month. So every time something like that happens, here's how you handle it. And you start over time when these one-off things happen, you make the decision. Like, is this going to be, a once a year thing, a once a week thing? And you figure out how to operationalize it. So not only does it not impact you, but you have a procedure for handling it. And as you start to grow, the best part about it is you start to identify what you really don't like dealing with, like what keeps you the most stressed, and you find great people to handle it for you. So
Mm.
not only like do you have a procedure for it, but you have a person that handles it. So it's not even going to impact you that much at all. And they'll they'll ideally just give you a business decision to make if it even gets that far. So for me, the more we grew, the more we scaled, the more complex the business got, the more that mental balance sheet would expand, and the more that's scale to me. Like we're describing scale.
And so a balance sheet's got assets and liabilities on it, right? So it's got kind of
Mm-hmm.
some in one column, some in another column. Are you sitting there saying, okay, I'm going to bank this really good feeling for then when something stressful is going to happen, or some, something feels like you got punched in the face, but you're like, no, I know that it always snaps back to average, because on a balance sheet, they even out, right?
I think about it like very literally. Like on the balance sheet, there's going to be all the costs of the business, and then there's going to be like, okay, let's say we're 100 people. All right, at any given time, there's 3 unhappy employees. There's 1 client that's dealing with an issue. There are 3 or 4 financial things that we're dealing with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like that is not stressful. That is not an abnormal week. That is simply just the cost of doing business for this industry, and that's just ever present, always happening. And the more and more that happens, month over month over month, it's just not stressful because it's just how the business operates.
One of the things that you were talking about that's super important for everyone is to figure out what gives you energy versus what takes energy away from you, and do more of what you're good at, right? So this is what Gay Hendricks would call the zone of genius. It's what Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan would call your unique ability. So like do more of that stuff and do less of the things that you just find draining or that you're not good at or you don't have the patience for or the skills for or whatever. Uh, really easy to say, really hard to do. So how do you hold yourself to account on that?
I I I try and hire people that are better than me at aspects of the job, and that's not to say like I don't think I know a lot about stuff. That's my biggest fault is I'm like I can learn something pretty quickly, but and I can be challenging about like asking the right questions or going deep on something to make sure the person who's advising has everything kind of accounted for. But for me, like I remember early on, as people started joining the agency, we were trying to find people that would not only help us do more work, but start to develop like centers of excellence, centers of expertise. And that could be early on, just like someone to manage the day to day or someone to manage the creative team or whatever. But ideally, you want to start building in like little pods where there's someone accountable for one thing or 2 things, and that allows you to start to kind of diversify the genius among other people, and ideally it's things you're not great at.
Yeah, Ben Hardy, who actually is going to be our main speaker at the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit in May in Boulder. He also wrote a book with Dan Sullivan called Who Not How, and that is really leaning into, okay, everyone's got different skill sets, different appetites for certain types of jobs and stuff like that, and finding the right people to be able to do the work, really frees up a lot of time, especially for the entrepreneur, because you're out there, you're focusing on hugely scaling your business, on doing the things that are moving the needle. You can't be running around with a to-do list of 1,000 items and all this stuff, especially if it's things that frankly someone else might be better at.
Yeah, like another thing I use is I mean it's like bottlenecks, right? Everyone talks about don't be a bottleneck, and the bottleneck is the worst possible thing for any business of any size, whether you're stagnant and even worse if you're growing. So the way I always tell my team is bottlenecks are the most important feedback loop that you can have. Every time there's a bottleneck and someone pings you, hey, just following up, whatever, please try and like take a mental photograph of that moment. And like, is that decision really, really essential that it comes from you? And if so, like, why are you holding up the process? But if it's not, then like, it's time for you to like figure out how to work in an additional level of scale. And I don't think of scale as like these big layers and big moments. I think of them as like micro decisions that start to compound over time and lead to like the business running way more efficiently. So I always say, like, if you're a first time manager, a first time, CEO, founder, etc., look for these bottlenecks. And bottlenecks are amazing feedback loops. It's
Mm.
real time way of figuring out how to make your company run better.
Yeah, and as the business grows, the number of bottlenecks grows. The what you call the cost of doing business grows as well, right? So
Yes.
so as you're scaling and you're doing this mental balance sheet, like what needed to change for you in your ability to handle the stress? Like how did your ability to handle stress scale as the business scaled, basically?
I mean, it's still it's still stressful, obviously.
It's not easy. It's not. If it was easy, everyone would be doing this.
Exactly, exactly. So I'm not like a shining case study of not stress, but I would say that the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with the job. And honestly, I just look for I look for a business that 90% of the time there's uh, expected questions, results, expected business decisions I need to make, and I'm trying to like round out nuanced weirdness. And I think that, like, if most of your decision making is predictable, that means that like you're doing a good job. So when something is like jarring and unexpected and a big surprise, um, I like to really lean in and understand why, because those are the things that will most likely lead to heavy and high stress. So I'm just kind of like observant of a few things to
Yeah.
hope help me there.
And how's any of this translated to your management and leadership style? So how do you take these things that you've learned about, kind of getting stuff done, managing stress, focusing your energy, for example, and then make sure that's percolating throughout the organization?
For me, we always teach people at Wondersauce. We have so many great examples of homegrown talent staying with us for a long time. Like, we have very atypical growth paths here, and part of that is I think that, like, we don't see the business ladder very traditionally. So I'm always looking for people that have ambition and passion, and I want to work with them behind the scenes to get them where they need to be. So I always tell people when they're going into when they're starting at Wondersauce, when they're taking on more responsibility or management for the first time, or jumping into like a brand new thing, I say, like, look, we're going to throw you into the deep end, but we're going to give you like a really nice raft that you'll be able to swim to and float for as long as you need. So you need to get really comfortable asking questions to the people and bringing us in. No one is expecting you to be a hero. So I try and kind of demystify the unknown and encourage people to ask for help. I also like try and make people with good intentions. I make them feel comfortable making mistakes. I always say, make the same mistake 3 times. Once is because you've never done it before. Twice is probably because the same thing approached you from a different angle. And third is usually you're so excited to answer it correctly that something else slipped through the cracks because you were being too literal with the solve right away.
Mm.
And as long as you have good intentions, and also we're not talking about like business critical things here where they're going to like hurt one of our clients or
Yeah,
anything
not
like that.
existential decisions. Yeah.
Exactly. It allows people to know that like they don't need to be perfect. And we also have an active dialogue. So I think it comes down to, like, for me, like, that's my version of like creating a good culture. It's always been around like, I like watching people grow and take on more responsibility and feeling a sense of accomplishment. So you have to almost like give them more, but also let them know that it's going to be okay if they don't quite nail it.
Yeah, which is essentially the concept of psychological safety,
Yeah.
the freedom to make those kind of mistakes, and then put it in a certain box, like kind of put a box around it, so that it's not a gigantic existential crisis, but instead it's in a more controlled environment, and hopefully fail fast, fail early, learn from it, and hopefully don't do it 4 times. You said you're okay doing it 3 times, not 4. You've also said that that your employees, like you put this post on LinkedIn, talking about employees and your approach there, and specifically wanting wanting to be approachable and having the mindset that your employees are really client number one, right? So they're
Yeah.
the most important clients out there. How did you implement that, and how is that something that others can start to prioritize and live for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, we're a services business, so we're only as good as the people we have. And, you know, obviously our clients are super important, but we were not going to have happy clients unless we have happy people. So, for me, uh, you know, I I try and I try and showcase through my actions that um, no work is above me, and that I'm still willing to roll my sleeves up and get my hands dirty. So, and you'll see this sometimes. Like I'll join a brainstorm and it'll catch people off guard for a minute, and by the end of it, if it's a good meeting, people are comfortable like disagreeing with me or saying like my ideas are terrible and all that good stuff, and that makes me so happy because it I think it levels everyone because that's how I really believe it should be. Um, so for me, like a layer of approachability is really important at all levels of management. So when we have our executive team or our management team taking on reports or going through difficult times, I before giving them my advice on how to handle a situation, I try and dig in and understand like if they're being fair, if they're being approachable, if they've been available to make sure that they're a sounding board and a resource. So for me, like I don't know, I never had any formal background in management, so I've always had to just approach things how I would approach things in real life. And for me, the idea of being approachable was always like super important because I feel like that's just how you should be as a person.
I want to take advantage of the fact that you've done a lot of brand and marketing work, and actually ask some of the tactical stuff that I know is on the minds of a lot of entrepreneurs. So a lot of entrepreneurs, when they're thinking about building their company, we've all heard, things about brand equity or do this kind of marketing or that kind of marketing, and so on. And I certainly don't want the full masterclass on this, but what are your thoughts on the areas of marketing that founders typically get wrong? Like, where are we either totally underinvested and we should have spent more money, or we're totally overinvested and we should have spent less? Like, help us, like, give us your heuristic for people who are at the early stage and want to do this right.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because you can approach that from so many different angles. But I'll say that one of the funny jokes in the industry I'm in is we spend so much time doing marketing and advertising for our clients that we're horrible at doing it for ourselves. And it's
Right.
very true.
Right.
A lot of us have trouble positioning our service offering in differentiated ways. We are always like late to update our websites and our case studies. It's classic. I mean,
Right.
it really is. And I think that's a good problem to have. It means we're busy with clients. But I think that for me, um, marketing is a very important role of any organization. Like if you're a brand that sells things, products, services, obviously like you need a marketing strategy. Like it's as important as how good the thing you're selling is. But for services companies and for business to business professionals, I think it's as important. And it's there are many ways to do it, but for me, it's like we went the first few years without doing any marketing and advertising, and it was all based on like investing in our client relationships and doing word of mouth, where our clients loved the work, they would tell other people, and it would kind of like build this reputational awareness thing, and we would get a lot of work from that. So I was never quite comfortable with the traditional like networking or going to events and shaking hands, client dinners, all that stuff. It was never really like me. I like talking about the business. I like talking about the work. So for me, like producing thought leadership, writing on LinkedIn, joining, podcasts like this, it's something I really don't mind doing, and it allows us to tell our story and share our perspectives on many aspects of the business. And I think that like I consider something like this a brand awareness tactic where I'm not expecting to leave this show today and have like 7 leads in my inbox because of the conversation. This is like, it's compounding strategies that build over time, where if you do enough things, you'll get some sort of a lift organically. So I think you have to figure out as a brand, like what you're most comfortable investing in, from a marketing perspective, because like this stuff right here, it takes time. It doesn't cost dollars. So you don't have to have a huge budget to do marketing well, but you do have to understand what you're good at and what you're willing to put time in, because your time could actually pay off more than a paid budget or a big splashy campaign. So again, I know it's kind of tough to answer that question with because there's so many ways to go. But
yeah, I'll say that in my experience, having been a founder for a few companies, an entrepreneur for a long time, I think one of the ones that we do very little of well is actual differentiation. Like, how is what your product, service, solution, whatever it is, how is it actually different than anything else out there? And we default to like very lazy language around that. And we also put a lot of burden on the customer to figure it out themselves instead of having a lot of clarity. Like, for example, on the Conscious Entrepreneur website, the part that I get the most feedback on is we have this part that says, not like other events. And it says, here's what we don't talk about. And we don't talk about, whatever. We don't talk about, basically like finance, sales, fundraising, how much cash is in your bank, get rich quick schemes, all the kind of like mechanics of business. And then it says, what we do talk about resilience, mindset, psychology, getting out of your own way, managing stress, leadership, etc. And that's just like makes it super clear. Like, if you care about this stuff, you should come. If you care about this other stuff, you should not be here because you're not going to enjoy the event. And that's the one part of the website that I've been getting the most feedback on.
And you could almost make a case then, from a marketing perspective, that one part of the website should be where you invest all your time and energy to double down on and make that your entire brand. So like, those are things we advise our clients on. We want to cast a wide net and understand what customers are resonating with. And when we find a unique angle, we exploit it. We want to go really deep on that and own it. And then the conversation comes, well, are we limiting our audience by just going after this? And you can say, well, maybe we are, but are we going to have highly qualified people that we can convert at a higher rate that'll cost less money to convert? And then will our reputation grow because there's going to be better happiness at these events because everyone's there for the same exact reason. So networking will be good. So then we can start layering in the networking angle as another core advantage and differentiation for the event. So it really is like super smart to be very specific, because it allows you to, over time, slowly differentiate your business or service.
So what's keeping you up at night these days? AI?
Not really. I mean, I'm inspired by it, honestly. We use it a lot, and it's a collaboration tool. It's efficiency. It's a way to make the ideas better or focus on, more value-driven decisions versus, things that just take time from a churn standpoint. But it's definitely going to shake things up. I think, it's going to really, really change the definition of scale. I don't think scale is going to be defined by amount of people. It's going to be, or the amount of time and hours it takes. It's going to be really around the value that you deliver. And like big challenges could be solved by small amounts of people. So like, I think the idea of scale is really interesting, and it'll be interesting to see how people play on that. As you start to hear about, how small pockets of individuals either launch something very impressive or solve the big challenge. And so I think it's actually quite inspiring.
Nice. Fantastic. Well, John Sampogna, thanks so much for joining me today. Great to have this conversation. Congrats on Wondersauce. Super interesting scaling story. Any last words of wisdom for budding entrepreneurs who are just out there starting out?
I think it's just a matter of doing something for the right reasons. I think there are many ways to make money in this world. And if you're not passionate about what you're doing, you're going to have that much harder of a time standing out from your competitive set. So go all in on something that you're super into, because it'll be that much easier to have success.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me on Conscious Entrepreneur.
Thank you. Thank you so much.